A statement on the UK's policy towards Afghanistan. 20 years ago, Osama bin Laden and the al-Qaeda leadership had turned Afghanistan into the epicenter of global terrorism, where, in the words of the author Ahmed Rashid, everything was available: training, funding, communications, and inspiration. And it was in the mountain ranges of this sanctuary that al-Qaeda operated a formidable network of terrorist training camps, drilling and indoctrinating thousands of recruits. The terrorists who acquired their murderous skills in Afghanistan or who were organized from its soil dispersed across the world, inflicting bloodshed and tragedy on 3 continents. They detonated truck bombs in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam in 1998, killing 224 people. They attacked the USS Cole in Aden in 2000, killing 17 people. And then they perpetrated their most heinous atrocity, claiming almost 3,000 lives in New York, Pennsylvania, and Washington on September the 11th, 2001. Today, thankfully, the situation is very different. The training camps have been destroyed. What remains of al-Qaeda's leadership no longer resides in Afghanistan, and no terrorist attacks against Western targets have been mounted from Afghan soil since 2001. We should never lose sight of these essential facts. On the morning after September the 11th, few would have predicted that no more terrorist attacks on that scale would be launched from Afghanistan in the next 20 years. These gains were achieved by an American-led military intervention mounted with overwhelming international support, including troops from dozens of countries, and the first and only invoking of NATO's Article 5 security guarantee. And we can take pride that Britain was part of that effort from the beginning. Over the last 2 decades, 150,000 members of our armed forces have served in Afghanistan, mainly in Helmand province, which was, from 2006 onwards, a focus of our operation. In the unforgiving desert of some of the world's harshest terrain and shoulder to shoulder with the Afghan security forces, our servicemen and women sought to bring development and stability. The House will join with me in commending their achievements and paying heartfelt tribute to the 457 British service personnel who laid down their lives in Afghanistan to keep us safe. We always acted in the closest partnership with the government and people of Afghanistan, and we owe an immense debt to the translators and other locally employed staff who risked their lives alongside British forces. We have already helped more than 1,500 former Afghan staff and their families to begin new lives here in the UK. This year we adopted a new policy offering priority relocation to the UK to any current or former locally employed staff assessed to be under serious threat to their lives, together with their close families. British diplomats and development experts worked alongside our allies to rebuild the country, opening schools and clinics where there had been none, and bringing safe water and electricity to millions of people for the first time. Anyone who lives in comfort as we do should not underestimate the importance of their advances. In Taliban-ruled Afghanistan, virtually no girls attended school. They were, as a matter of declared policy, driven from the classroom and forbidden from returning. Today, 3.6 million girls are going to school in Afghanistan, seizing their chance to escape from illiteracy and poverty. The Girls' Education Challenge Fund, established by the British government, has helped over 250,000 Afghan girls into the classroom. And our priority now must be to work alongside our Afghan and other partners to preserve these vital gains and the legacy of what has been achieved. Under the Taliban, women were excluded from governance. Today, women hold over 1/4 of the seats in Afghanistan's parliament. And since 2002, over 5 million refugees have returned to Afghanistan under the UN's voluntary repatriation programme, aided by the fact that Britain, the UN, and our Afghan and international partners have together cleared over 8.4 million landmines or other unexploded munitions, restoring 340,000 acres of land for productive use. In 2018, Herat province was declared free of mines after 10 years of painstaking work by the Halo Trust based in Dumfriesshire in a UK-funded programme. So no one should doubt the gains of the last 20 years, but nor can we shrink from the hard reality of the situation today. The international military presence in Afghanistan was never intended to be permanent. We and our NATO allies were always going to withdraw our forces. The only question was when, and there could never be a perfect moment. As long ago as 2014, the UK ceased all combat operations and brought the great majority of our troops home, reorientating our role and our involvement. About 750 service personnel stayed in Afghanistan under NATO's mission to train and assist the country's security forces. Last year, the US decided to withdraw its troops from Afghanistan while the Taliban undertook to prevent, and I quote, any group or individual, including al-Qaeda, from using the soil of Afghanistan to threaten the security of the United States and its allies. President Biden announced in April that all American forces would leave by September at the latest. And the NATO summit declared last month that the alliance's military operations in Afghanistan were coming to an end. As a result, all British troops assigned to NATO's mission in Afghanistan are now returning home. And for obvious reasons, I will not disclose the timetable of our departure, though I can tell the House that most of our personnel have already left. I hope that no one will leap to the false conclusion that the withdrawal of our forces somehow means the end of Britain's commitment to Afghanistan. We are not about to turn away, nor are we under any illusions about the perils of today's situation and what may lie ahead. We always knew that supporting Afghanistan would be a generational undertaking, and we were equally clear that the instruments in our hands would change over time. Now, we shall use every diplomatic and humanitarian lever to support Afghanistan's development and stability. We will back the Afghan state with over £100 million of development assistance this year and £58 million for the Afghan National Security and Defence Forces. And we will, of course, continue to work alongside our Afghan partners against the terrorist threat. Our diplomats are doing everything they can to support a lasting peace settlement within Afghanistan, and they are working for regional stability, particularly by promoting better relations between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And here I commend General Carter, the Chief of the Defence Staff, for his steadfast efforts. I spoke to President Ghani on the 17th of June to assure him of the UK's commitment, and I was moved once again to hear his tribute to the British soldiers who strove so hard to give the Afghan people better lives. We must be realistic about our ability alone to influence the course of events. It will take combined efforts of many nations, including Afghanistan's neighbours, to help the Afghan people to build their future. But the threat that brought us to Afghanistan in the first place has been greatly diminished by the valour and by the sacrifice of the armed forces of Britain and many other countries. We are safer because of everything they did. Now we must persevere alongside our friends for the same goal of a stable Afghanistan, but with different tools in our hands, and I commend this statement to the House.
We now come to the Opposition Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of his statement? And can I also, first of all, give my apologies on behalf of the Leader of the Opposition, who is on a long-planned visit to meet political leaders in Northern Ireland. And may I also associate myself with the comments of the Prime Minister regarding the British service personnel and the collective efforts of our partners in NATO. This is a profound moment for more than 150,000 UK personnel who have served in Afghanistan during the last 20 years, including my honourable friends and members for Barnsley Central and Norwich South, and many more honourable members across this House. My own brother too served in the British Armed Forces during that period, so I know how it feels to say goodbye to a loved one before a tour of duty. Thankfully, Mr. Speaker, I do not know how it feels not to see your loved one come home again, and the pain that those families have gone through is unimaginable. Hundreds of British men and women lost their lives in the service of our country. Many more were wounded or injured and still suffer the physical and emotional scars. They have shown extraordinary bravery, skill and courage. So today, Mr. Speaker, to everyone who served in Afghanistan and to all that loved them and supported them, we say a huge thank you. There have been moments of huge difficulty in the last 2 decades, and the situation on the ground in Afghanistan today is more concerning than at any other point in many years. That must not take away from the many positives of our engagement has brought to Afghanistan and the real difference our services and development sector have made in a country that has suffered so much. We have supported improvements in security, in governance, in economic development, and, as the Prime Minister said, in advancing the rights of women and education for girls. Yet these gains have not been secured. The Taliban are making gains on the ground, and serious questions remain about the future stability of Afghanistan. A security threat remains to the wider world, including to the UK. And nobody wants to see British troops permanently stationed in Afghanistan, but we simply cannot wash our hands or walk away. It's hard to see a future without bloodier conflict and wider Taliban control. Already, they are on the brink of gaining control of provincial capitals, and Afghan security forces are at risk of being overwhelmed. This, Mr. Speaker, spells jeopardy for the Afghan people, particularly for Afghan women and girls, and all the things that the Prime Minister talked about earlier, who just in a just world would have had the same rights as women everywhere deserve. And in the words of the Prime Minister himself, this is a situation fraught with risk, and I understand that. So can he tell us if he argued for or against the withdrawal of the US government and in NATO, and what other steps he proposed? Our British troops made enormous sacrifices, and we believe, as a nation, we have a responsibility to our veterans. Can the Prime Minister really tell them that our work as a nation in Afghanistan is done, and their efforts will not be in vain? On their behalf, Mr. Speaker, I ask the Prime Minister, what plans are now in place to ensure that Afghanistan does not become a failed state and a breeding ground for those that wish to oppress their own citizens and threaten ours, and what additional threat does our country now face? What diplomatic plans will be in place in the region to support the peace process? And is the government, UK government, engaging with the government of Pakistan about its role? And will the UK embassy in Kabul remain? And how will we keep our UK staff there safe? Afghanistan remains one of the most poorest countries in the world. Yet our aid funding to that country is being cut by more than £100 million he referred to today. The UK funded a project of 6,000 women that has already been cancelled. When he visited Kabul as the Foreign Secretary, he said that girls' education was our crowning achievement. So can the Prime Minister tell the House what impact his cuts to the aid budget will have on programmes there, and will he not rethink those cuts again? Mr. Speaker, I reiterate that we all want to see an end to UK military operations in Afghanistan. But if we leave without putting a plan in place to ensure that Afghanistan does not go back to the conflict and violence of the past, then we would have failed those that have given so much over the last 20 years. Building and maintaining the peace and prosperity of Afghanistan, protecting women and girls, and in turn protecting our own nation should always be our priority. To honour the legacy of those that have served and the lives that were lost, let's make sure, Prime Minister, we get this right.
Prime Minister.
I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Lady for what she said, particularly the spirit in which she said it. Let me try and address some of her points. It is clear that what is happening now is a follow-up to what was very largely the withdrawal, the end of military operations in 2014. The presence since then has been much smaller, but a great deal of good work has continued to be done by British aid workers, by British armed forces, and by British diplomats. And she's right to draw attention to the work of educating girls and young women. I think the whole country can be proud of what has been achieved, and I can reassure her by saying that actually this country will not only continue to fund education in Afghanistan, to continue to support Afghanistan to the tune of £100 million, as I said, but we will also increase our funding for the Global Partnership for Education, and we'll be making further announcements about that later this month, when the Global Partnership for Education takes place here in London. And she asks the most important question, which I think veterans of the Afghan conflict will want to know, which is whether we think that the threat from Afghanistan has now been reduced. And the answer is yes, we do think the threat from Al-Qaeda is very substantially lower than it was in 2001. There remain threats, of course, from the Islamic State de Khorasan, from the Haqqani network. Of course, there remain terrorist threats from Afghanistan. But the answer is to have a peaceful and a negotiated solution, and that is what our diplomats will continue to work for. And I would just say to the Taliban, they've made the commitment that I read out to the House in their negotiations with General Khalilzad. They must abide by those commitments. And they should, I'm sure that they will be aware that there is no military path. There is no military path to victory for the Taliban. There must be a peaceful and a negotiated settlement for the political crisis in Afghanistan. And the UK will continue to work to ensure that that takes place. And I believe that that can happen. I don't believe that the Taliban are guaranteed the kind of victory that you sometimes read about, Mr. Speaker, and the UK will continue to exert all its diplomatic and political efforts to ensure that there is a better future for the people of Afghanistan, for the women of Afghanistan, for young people growing up in Afghanistan, and that the legacy of those 150,000 British serving men and women who went through Afghanistan, and above all the 457 who laid down their lives, that their legacy is properly honoured, Mr. Speaker.
Comes to the Church-led Committee, Tom Trugan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may I first of all say thank you to the Prime Minister for coming and giving this statement himself. This is an enormously personal issue for me. I didn't meet the Honourable Member for Barnsley Central here or in any of the clubs or think tanks around Westminster. I met him about 20 miles to the west of Garmsir in the desert as we were fighting side by side against the enemies he's just listed. And the achievements that he has listed were won with the blood of my friends, and I can point him to the graves where they now lay, because that legacy is now one that is in real doubt, and we know it. And we know that it's not just his decision. We know that the US decision to withdraw forces was fundamental here. But can he explain to me, how does Britain's foreign policy work in a country like Afghanistan? If persistence isn't persistent, if endurance doesn't endure, then how can people trust us as an ally? How can people look at us as a friend? This reminds me not of Vietnam, but of Germany in 1950, at a time when we could have walked away. We could have said, it's too expensive, it's too difficult to rebuild. Let's let Stalin have it and see what happens. But we didn't, we stayed. And in doing so, we liberated the whole of Europe peacefully. Now, I understand that it's hard to do that, and I understand it demands a lot. But the integrated review set out a really impressive strategy. And it wasn't just summarized with the 3 words, God bless America.
Yeah, very good.
I thank my honourable friend, and I'm sure the whole House will want to thank him for his service in Afghanistan and everything, the good that he did with his fellow serving men and women in Afghanistan. But as I think he conceded in his question, what the UK has been able to do in Afghanistan has not been possible through our efforts alone, Mr. Speaker. And we have to work with others. And of course the United States plays a massive role in these considerations. But I wish to reassure him and to reassure the House that we are not walking away. And I made that point absolutely clear to President Ghani on the 17th of June. We are, as I say to the Right Honourable Lady, I should have answered that point. We are keeping our embassy in Kabul. And we will continue to work with our friends and allies, and particularly with the government of Pakistan, to try to bring a settlement, to try to ensure that the Taliban understand that there can be no military path to victory, and there must be a negotiated solution. And that is what the British government will continue to do, and that has been very largely what we have been doing, Mr. Speaker, since 2014.
We now come to SNP leader Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And actually, it's a pleasure to follow the member for Tunbridge and Wallingham. We should listen very carefully to what he had to say, for he and others in this House that served in Afghanistan, and indeed all through these islands that went to that country, those that have sadly lost their lives, but those, of course, who were injured in the conflict, many of those that are maimed for the rest of their life. Let me thank the Prime Minister for coming to the House and for advanced sight of his statement. This is an important statement, and of course it's largely about national security. And let me state that I think there is an obligation on all of us on this side of the House to work constructively, to be a critical support to what we're seeking to achieve here. And in that spirit, I commend the Prime Minister and his office for agreeing to Privy Council meetings for the Leader of the Opposition and ourselves, because it's important that we are as informed as we should be in order that we can play the role in scrutinising the government but supporting as where appropriate. Mr. Speaker, while there would have been no question about the UK realistically maintaining a presence unilaterally in Afghanistan, there is no point pretending that the vacuum created by the accelerated withdrawal of US and allied forces has done nothing but create instability. Mr. Speaker, we know the departure of the remaining Western forces from Afghanistan has emboldened Taliban insurgents. In recent days, the Taliban have seized several districts, and they have made it clear that they expect any Western forces left behind, even those guarding Kabul airport or embassies, to be a violation of the Doha deal. Mr. Speaker, it is the stability of the country and the humanitarian interests of Afghanis which should be foremost in the minds of the leaders who have had operations in that country. A situation where violent extremism and fundamentalism returns to the heart of political life in Afghanistan would be dire for Afghanis as well as our allies in the region and beyond. Mr. Speaker, in the last hours we've seen a fight back, both from Afghani government troops as well as civilians, intensify. And a stark reminder of what is at stake, thousands of women have protested in the streets for the freedoms that they know that the Taliban will deny them. All they want is what we want, a more open Afghanistan there is a better place for women for its future instead of going back to the senseless cruelty of the past. For these reasons, it is utterly inexplicable that we have cut aid spending in this country. It hinders any progress in rooting out extremism, abuses against women, and of course protecting human rights. Can I ask the Prime Minister as to what general assessment has been made as to any potential security implications of the developments in Afghanistan? What are the implications of any threats from Al-Qaeda and Islamic State? What measures will be taken by the UK Government to protect the UK's diplomatic presence in Kabul? Finally, Mr Speaker, I would like to take the opportunity to pay respects on behalf of my party to the families of the 457 British troops whose lives were lost in Afghanistan. I'm sure many of them will be following the proceedings in this House and the actions taken by the Government. They'll be asking questions to make sure that there is a lasting legacy to the sacrifices that were made by so many.
Yeah.
Again, I thank the right honourable gentleman for the spirit and the content of his remarks, and on the substance of his questions. To me, our assessment is that the threat from Afghanistan to this country has very substantially diminished as the result of the actions by the UK and our friends over the last 20 years, though clearly a threat remains. And the extent of that threat will now depend on exactly what happens. And to come to his points about the Taliban, their intentions and the progress that they are making, I think it is true that the Taliban are making rapid progress in rural areas. But that does not mean, Mr. Speaker, that they are guaranteed a victory in the whole of Afghanistan or across the urban areas of Afghanistan, whereas he points out in his question there is lively resistance to what they have to offer and their view of the way things should be. And that's why this government, through all our agencies, diplomatic, political, development and otherwise, we will continue to work for a negotiated settlement, particularly with regional actors such as Pakistan. And I do believe that is the best way forward for Afghanistan. There must be a settlement, and it will have to, I think we must be realistic about this, Mr. Speaker, it will have to include the Taliban.
We have audio only as we go to Tobias Elwood. Tobias.
Mr. Speaker, decisions don't come any bigger for a Prime Minister than to send our armed forces to war. But when an overseas operation lasts 2 decades, costs hundreds of British lives, billions of pounds to the taxpayer, and ends in retreat, it would be a dereliction of duty not to ask what went so wrong. We now abandon the country to the fate of the very insurgent organisation we went in to defeat in the first place. I say to the Prime Minister, if we don't learn the lessons of failing to appreciate Afghan history, the folly of imposing Western solutions, the delays in training Afghan security forces, and denying the Taliban a place at the table back in December 2001, we are likely to repeat similar mistakes in the future. I ask the Prime Minister, please conduct a formal inquiry.
Prime Minister.
I must caution my honourable friend that I don't think that is the right way forward at this stage. And he asks about he calls this a retreat, Mr. Speaker. This was never intended at any stage to be an open-ended commitment or engagement by UK armed services in Afghanistan. There was no intention for us to remain there forever. And as the House knows, Operation Herrick concluded in 2014, and at that stage, the Army conducted a thorough internal review of the lessons that needed to be learned, and those were incorporated into the integrated review of our armed and defence, security and defence strategy, which was published earlier this year. And, Mr. Speaker, given the length of such inquiries, I think the Chilcot inquiry went on for 7 years and cost many millions of pounds. I do not think that this is necessary at this stage. I think that the government should rather focus its efforts on ensuring that we do everything we can to secure the prosperity and the peace, I should say, and stability of the people of Afghanistan. And that's what we'll do.
Let's go to Ed Davey. Ed.
Mr. Speaker, can I join the Prime Minister in paying tribute to the role our armed forces have played in Afghanistan, and especially remember the 450 men and women who laid down their lives and the many more who sustained lifelong injuries. We are grateful to them and remember them and their families. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister rightly says our country retains a responsibility to the people of Afghanistan. So with Afghan soldiers trained by allied forces surrendering all too frequently, and with some analysts predicting that the Taliban are probably only months away from taking Kabul, and with the new era of injustice, inequality and brutality facing the women and girls of Afghanistan, and with the potential for a new vector of international terrorism forming across Afghanistan, can the Prime Minister explain with far more substance how the British government plans to work with our international partners to fulfill the responsibility he accepts we still have to the Afghan people?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we are going to continue, first of all, on his first point about supporting the Afghan national security and defence forces. We will continue to do that, as I have said, and as I pledged to President Ghani, with at least another £58 million. And what we are doing is working with the regional actors, particularly Pakistan, and he knows that the Pakistan security services have a very considerable influence in Afghanistan. We are working with the Pakistani government to ensure, and with the Taliban, to ensure that there is a progress towards a negotiated solution. And in Kabul, there are many actors, as I'm sure the Right Honourable gentleman knows, that it is a very fractured scene politically in Kabul. The UK government knows all those actors well. It is essential that they work together for a negotiated settlement and work together for the long-term future of Afghanistan, and that's what we will do.
Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Prime Minister for coming to the House to make this statement. Can I say to him that we clearly, I agree with him, owe a debt of honour to our members of our armed forces, many who have lost their lives, but also those who have been badly maimed and who have done their country proud in what they've delivered. As he said, education for women, clinics, healthcare, and freedoms that were not there before under the Taliban. The Prime Minister said in his statement, though, that he says, I hope no one will leap to the false conclusion that withdrawal of our forces somehow means the end of Britain's commitment to Afghanistan. So I have a very simple question for him. How far does that commitment extend? If the Taliban take over and they take away the women's rights to education, do we intervene? If they take away the rights and freedoms that we gave them, do we intervene? If they end up killing and maiming more people in Afghanistan and allowing terrorist organizations in, do we intervene? My question is, as one veteran said to me literally 48 hours ago, this begins to look a little bit like the last days of Vietnam, an unprecedented and hurried exit with no commitment. Are we committed?
Yes, as I've said in my answers to the Right Honourable Lady and to other members who've asked effectively the same point, the circumstances in 2001 when this country went into Afghanistan were quite exceptional. NATO's Article 5 of mutual appeal for defence was invoked by our American friends, and that's why we went in. And it was a quite exceptional moment. And since then, in the last 20 years, we have achieved a very great deal. Increase in life expectancy in Afghanistan from 56 to 64 years. The education of women has been mentioned, and we will continue through development assistance and by other means to do whatever we can for the long-term future of Afghanistan. But as he knows, the fundamental military decision to cease Operation Herrick was the turning point. What we're going to do now is use our best endeavours, our best efforts, all our political engagement to produce a negotiated settlement and to produce a stable future for Afghanistan.
We can now go to Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This has to be a day of reflection. We have spent billions of pounds in the war in Afghanistan. 450 British troops have lost their lives. Thousands of Americans and other troops have lost their lives. And many, many thousands of Afghan people have lost their lives. And many more have been forced to be refugees in exile all around the region, as well as in Western Europe. Surely we need to think about this very, very carefully. And it's disappointing that the Prime Minister appeared to reject calls for an inquiry at the Liaison Committee yesterday and appeared to reject the request for an inquiry made by the member for Bournemouth East today. Can I ask him to think again about that? Surely we need an inquiry into how such a decision came around to go into Afghanistan in the first place, and now the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and of course the chaos that is being left behind. He will have noted that there are some talks going on, which have been cautiously welcomed by the United States in Tehran between the Afghan government and the Taliban. He will also have noted that there are large numbers of Afghan refugees now in Tajikistan as well as in Pakistan. What efforts will he be making to try to ensure that there is not a descent into civil war in Afghanistan, but some kind of diplomatic initiative that will at least bring about security for the people of Afghanistan, and that includes obviously the entire population. And I'm thinking here particularly those children that have suffered so much and those women that have been so grievously discriminated against within that country. And whilst Britain is withdrawing, surely we need to recognise that when we make hasty foreign policy decisions to go to war, the consequences go on for a very long time. In this case, it is now the 20th anniversary of that decision.
Minister.
Thank the right honourable gentleman, and I of course am aware of what's happening in Tehran and the contacts that are taking place, and the UK, the role of the UK government is to promote dialogue, and I've said what I've said about the Taliban and the reality of the position that Afghanistan finds itself in. I don't think that the Taliban are capable of victory by military means. I've made that point several times, and the UK will work principally through our friends in Pakistan, but other actors as well on the ground in Kabul to try to bring about a settlement that works for Afghanistan. On his question about an inquiry, I really want to repeat what I said to several colleagues who've asked that. I don't think that another Chilcot-style inquiry is called for at this stage, particularly since the fundamental decision was taken in 2014 to end Op Herrick's a long time ago now. But what I do think the House could always consider is whether the Defence Committee, for instance, wishes to investigate themselves.
Dr. Liam Fox.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank my right honourable friend for this statement, and having been in Afghanistan many times, can I add also my very sincere tribute to our armed forces and also the civilian support and the NGOs and all those who risked and sometimes sacrificed life and limb to give the people of Afghanistan a better future. Can I ask my right honourable friend what discussions he has had with our international partners, particularly the United States, about how we will monitor and react if the hard-won gains that we made, including the rights of women, roll backwards under the brutal medieval influence of the Taliban, and perhaps even, God forbid, the re-emergence of a terrorist threat?
I thank the right honourable gentleman who knows a great deal about Afghanistan and the problems that country faces. And of course, we've raised repeatedly with our American friends and other colleagues in NATO the legacy that we wish to preserve in Afghanistan, particularly the gains that have been made for women, and they understand that. I think in all candour, I must be honest with that, I don't think that the military options open to us are very great. And I think people need to recognise that, to return to the point I was making to my right honourable friend for Chingford. but we will do whatever we can diplomatically, politically, to get a realistic, lasting solution for Afghanistan.
Henry Benn.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, the Prime Minister told the Liaison Committee that he was apprehensive about the future of Afghanistan and that it was fraught with risks. A sentiment shared by many Afghans who fear that the gains of which he has spoken so eloquently today, girls' education, democracy, may be lost. After 2 decades and the sacrifice of so many British lives, whose loss we mourn today and always, why is the Prime Minister so confident that the Taliban will never again allow any part of Afghanistan, because they control some parts already, to be used by terrorist forces, including ISIS, as a base from which to attack this country and other of our allies?
Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman makes a very important point. I think that obviously the Taliban have for several years now controlled a very considerable part of Afghanistan, as he knows, and it's during that period that we haven't seen terrorist operations launched against the wider world. And I think what may weigh on the Taliban's minds as they think about how to behave, whether to allow the Khorasan province group or Haqqani network or Al-Qaeda to return and reform in the way that they were there in the past and to act outside Afghanistan, they should remember what happened last time.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
So it sounds from that, Madam Deputy Speaker, as if the Prime Minister is saying that if they go down that route again, there could be another military intervention. So does he accept that a fanatical brand of Islamist terrorism, sheltered and supported by the Taliban extremists, has not only attacked the West before, but is highly likely to do so again? He mentioned that the military operations route is not great, but rather than veering from occupation to evacuation and back again in a few years' time, will he now commission a study of an alternative containment strategy involving selective strikes with allies from strategic bases to prevent a total terrorist takeover of Afghanistan?
Well, Afghanistan, I thank the Right Honourable John, but Afghanistan was never occupied, Madam Deputy Speaker, and nor is this an evacuation. But what we will certainly look at, in addition to working with friends and partners in the region, is to what extent counter-terrorist, I think the point he's getting at, to what extent counter-terrorist activity can be conducted from outside Afghanistan on an outside-in basis.
11 withdrawn. So Andrew Mitchell.
I thank the Prime Minister very much for coming and making this difficult and important statement today to the House. I thank him also for what he said about the contribution that's been made by the Girls' Education Challenge Fund, which we set up in 2010 and has been responsible for the education in Afghanistan of millions of girls. It seems to me that his statement makes eloquently clear the limits of soft power and the importance of soft power. I take it that that was one of the things he was referring to at the end of his statement when he spoke about the different tools for the future, because it is soft power now which will help the Afghan state survive and hopefully deliver for its people. So I hope he won't think it's unreasonable to ask if he will look again at the recent extraordinary decision to cut our development spending in Afghanistan by £200 million.
I thank him, and I know this is a subject that he has returned to many times in this House, and I understand how deeply he feels about it and how much he understands. It's still the case, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we were the third biggest bilateral donor last year to Afghanistan. We're committing a further £100 million per year to the people of Afghanistan, plus the military and logistical support for the Afghan National Security and Defence Forces. I think most people in this country understand that after giving £3.2 billion in development assistance over the last 10 years to Afghanistan. I think people do understand that we're in tough financial times here in the UK, and that it remains a remarkable thing and a matter of pride that the UK is able to continue to support the people of Afghanistan in the way that we are.
We now go via video link to Sarah Champion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for recognising the amazing work that aid workers have done to date in Afghanistan. I'd like to quote from the government's own website, DevTracker, which today states, "Almost 40 years of conflict have left Afghanistan one of the poorest and most fragile countries in the world. Creating a more stable environment will help reduce poverty and make progress towards the global goals. It will also reduce threats to the UK from violence and extremism and discourage illegal migration." Our funding to aid to Afghanistan has fallen dramatically. In 2019-20, FCDO spent 244 million, while the Conflict Stability and Security Fund spent an additional 48 million. Last year we spent over 170, and this year 100 million has been committed. So at the very moment that we're withdrawing troops, we're also cutting the aid that helps maintain stability in the country. How does this keep us safe, Prime Minister, or indeed build upon the investment we've already made through our development work?
Prime Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, this country remains, as I've just told the House, one of the biggest bilateral donors in aid to Afghanistan in the world, and I think the people of this country should take great pride in that. And a statistic I didn't mention earlier on, it's thanks to the work of, I think partly thanks to the work of the UK, the whole NATO mission, that mortality for women and children in Afghanistan has fallen faster than in any other low-income country, to get back to her earlier point.
Now go via video link to Richard Drax.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I first pay tribute and thank all those who have served in Afghanistan so professionally and courageously. Can I press my right honourable friend on the point raised by the right honourable member for North Somerset by asking him how we, the UK and our allies, can now physically stop Afghanistan from becoming once again a haven for international terrorism? For let's not be naive, the Taliban are back and all the horrors associated with them.
Prime Minister.
A couple of quick points. I think it's important for my honourable friends not to exaggerate our ability by military might alone to stop parts of Afghanistan already being used for terrorist purposes, if that were what the Taliban desired to do, given that they already possess substantial portions of that country. It's also the case that there are many other parts of the world where, after all, international terrorism can be used as a base for international terrorism. What we propose to do is to continue to work with our friends to look at an outside-in approach to counter-terrorism and to work with regional actors to ensure that we have a solution in Kabul that prevents that country lurching back into becoming a haven for terrorism in the way that he describes. As I've told the House, I don't think that will necessarily be easy, but it is by no means impossible, and the hope is certainly there.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank the Prime Minister for coming to the Chamber to make a statement. He has noted the importance of the Afghanistan nation that we have worked so hard together with to create real change. And I'm ever mindful that I did have the opportunity to visit Afghanistan in 2012 on behalf of my own party, Prime Minister, and at that time I was able to meet some of the Irish Guards and the Royal Irish Regiment. So I'm aware of and some of those are my constituents who have served and who have given their lives and who also are injured as a result. The sacrifice of many of our brave service personnel and lives lost and injuries. I have a photograph in my office which was taken at that time with the Afghan National Army, the recruits at the training college that they were at. I was very impressed by their courage and by their bravery. But yet there is a real fear that Afghanistan will feel our loss too deeply. What discussions have taken place with the USA, with other interested allies, to ensure that there is enough munitions, enough physical support, help, advice and guidance as required for the future of our friends, all citizens and allies in Afghanistan.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman. Also, may I join him in paying tribute to the sacrifice of all the serving men and women of the Irish Guards, the Royal Irish Regiment, and those who sacrificed their lives in Afghanistan, everything that they did to protect the people of that country. What we're doing is, and the UK has helped to train, as he knows, about 5,500 officers in the Afghan security and defence forces, and we will continue to invest in them with £58 million per year in the way that I've described. And of course, we will be doing that in concert with our American friends and allies.
Now go via video link to Alan Cairns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 3 years ago, I had the privilege of visiting Afghanistan and seeing the Welsh Guards in action. It's fair to say that the threats that they faced and the risks that they overcame were simply humbling. Now, their efforts will have helped many receive an education that otherwise wouldn't have done so. The makings of a civic society were being brought together. But will my right honourable friend join me in paying tribute to them, and that the best efforts to do that is to continue our diplomatic and political focus, as well as continuing to use our generous overseas aid budget in seeking to pay a significant legacy in that part of the world.
Prime Minister.
I want to share completely the feelings of my right honourable friend, and to join him in thanking the men and women of the Welsh Guards and all other armed forces who did so much in so many ways. Sanitation, electricity, and generally improving the life chances of the people of Afghanistan. And we will do whatever we can from now on, diplomatically, politically, with our development budgets, to make sure that we protect the legacy of their achievement.
Now go via video link to Hyle Williams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for his statements. Now, with over 250,000 civilian lives lost, 457 British soldiers dead on Afghanistan's plains, and thousands more at home, but maimed in body and mind, will the Prime Minister, unlike some of his predecessors, please give me his frank assessment? Is the terrorist threat really eliminated? And won't the Taliban just reverse the progressive gains of the last 20 years? And were those lives lost and ruined in vain?
Prime Minister.
No, I thank the Honourable Gentleman. I know I absolutely don't believe that the sacrifice of British troops over the last 20 years has been in vain, and I believe that they're leaving a lasting legacy in Afghanistan, and in 20 years they have helped substantially to reduce the threat of terrorism. As I've told the House, and I think candidly, that threat of course has not gone away, but we must do everything that we can to ensure that the Taliban stick to their promises, stick to what they have said, but also work to ensure that there is a settlement in Afghanistan that is propitious to a new approach and a new settlement for the people of Afghanistan. That means there isn't the temptation to use that country as a harbour for terrorist operations.
Video link to Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Given the high likelihood that China will now exploit the opportunity presented by the US departure, extending the Belt and Road Initiative, buying off the Taliban, muting their opposition to abuses in Xinjiang, what approach will my right honourable friend take with our allies to the resulting greatly strengthened Beijing-Tehran axis, with all its grisly potential for security, prosperity and human rights?
I thank my honourable friend. The Chinese are not as yet a very major player in Afghanistan, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I think my honourable friend is absolutely right. It is vital that the people of Afghanistan should determine their own future.
Video link to Chi Onwara.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Armed Forces Covenant states Those injured in service, whether physically or mentally, should be cared for in a way that reflects the nation's moral obligation to them. In the North East, we are proud of and grateful to our servicemen and women, but local charities like Anxious Minds and Forward Assist tell me mental health support is wholly inadequate. So will the Prime Minister tell us how he proposes to support the mental well-being of those returning from service in Afghanistan, and why his government does not even collect data on how many veterans have committed suicide or experienced PTSD or other mental problems?
The Honourable Lady is absolutely right to draw attention to the problems that veterans of conflict have experienced, and in particular the health and mental health problems. And last year we put 16 million more pounds into veterans' health, mental health in particular. This year I think the number's gone up to 17 million pounds. But we also want to make sure that we are clear with people signing up for our armed forces that we will respect their service throughout their lives. That's why we instituted the rail card for veterans and the national insurance holiday for employers who take on veterans, prioritise veterans for social housing. Madam Deputy Speaker, set up an office for veterans and have a minister for veterans in the form of my honourable friend, the member for Aldershot.
Ms Ratghani. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to join the Prime Minister and pay tribute to the armed forces who have served in Afghanistan. And on behalf of my constituency in Wilden, pay respect to the 457 lives lost. I know the Prime Minister is very dedicated in supporting women and girls. I was in Afghanistan post 9/11, and the women and girls are telling me now that under Taliban, regardless of any peace settlement, they are lambs to a slaughter. Schools will be closed and clinics will be closed. I believe that President Biden is due to make an announcement and provide safe passage to 2,000 vulnerable women. But I would argue with those women leaving, there will be a further vacuum of women being able to carry out education and any medical treatment, which will mean more female lives lost in Afghanistan. Can I ask the Prime Minister, what support are we going to give to the embassy when the Taliban arrive in Kabul? And secondly, with the growth of the Taliban and in their wings Daesh, there will be an export of violent extremism. So what strategies are in place to protect our children here who may be brainwashed by violent extremism? Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and I also, by the way, thank her for her service in Afghanistan for the overseas service of the world service of the BBC, and I know that she knows and cares deeply about that country. We will, of course, work with the Americans and all our NATO allies to achieve the objectives that she sets out, particularly protecting this country against terrorist threats, but also making sure that any settlement that we are able to encourage protects the rights and freedoms of women that have been won partly through the efforts and sacrifice of British Armed Services.
Kevin Jones.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement and join him in thanking all those that have served in Afghanistan and those that have lost their lives. The Prime Minister is very clear that withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan doesn't mean that we're not going to be committed to the future of Afghanistan. But like the Right Honourable Member for Chingford and Wood Green, I'd just like to be clear what that commitment is. He says that he wants to negotiate a settlement, which I agree with him, everyone does. But over the next few days and months, Afghan security forces are going to come under attack. So will they get access to logistic, intelligence and air support which they're going to need? I accept that won't just be delivered by the United Kingdom, it will be a coalition agreement, but we need to have some clarity on that if we're not going to see the collapse of some of those forces very quickly.
Prime Minister.
I thank him, and I know he understands the situation very well. I mean, may I just say to him, it's not open, I don't think, to the Taliban to enforce a military solution, but nor is it open to us, to NATO, to have a military solution either. And I'm sure he will accept that. What we want is a negotiated settlement that I think is in the best interest of all parties.
Sir Edward Lee.
The Prime Minister has been given a hard time today, and I have a lot of sympathy for him, because given that we have to follow in the wake of the Americans, we have very few cards to play. And I give him credit for coming here and taking it on the chin that this is a catastrophic defeat for the West. Very sad day for tens of thousands of British personnel whose life work may now lie in ruins, and abandonment of all our friends in Afghanistan. And, you know, let's be honest, the Taliban will probably take over large tracts of the country and the rest may be taken over by warlords. So it's a desperate situation. But am I asked this question? Given that we've spent all this money on overseas aid, I think over 825 million in the last 4 years, and given that we know from our Syrian experience that there's no point in dispensing aid in a completely war-torn country, it just leads to corruption and disaster, is he prepared to work with our NATO allies to ensure not only that our embassy is protected, but aid workers are protected, that there is some minimum military force? Otherwise, there's no point in dispersing this aid to Afghanistan. It will just go up in flames.
I thank him. We will do whatever we can to ensure that we protect our diplomatic and our development assistance, obviously. But I just don't accept the characterisation that my right honourable friend has given of what is happening today. After all, the main strategic decision to end Op Herrick took place in 2014, and I believe actually that the legacy of UK involvement in Afghanistan is a proud one and will be a lasting one. Millions of children educated who would not otherwise have been educated, millions of girls in school who would not otherwise have been in school, and the reduction in the terrorist threat for that country for decades, and the chance, I think, still of a political negotiated settlement involving the Taliban, which is, I think, really the only realistic prospect for that country.
Marion Fellows.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's right today that we remember the sacrifices of our troops in Afghanistan. In his statement, the Prime Minister said that 3.6 million girls are now going to school in Afghanistan, and that the Girls' Education Challenge Fund has helped over 250,000 Afghan girls into the classroom, and that our priority must be to work alongside our Afghan and other partners to preserve what has already been achieved. And in response to the Honourable Member for Ashton-under-Lyme, the Prime Minister said there would be an increase in funding for the Global Partnership for Education this year. Can the Prime Minister therefore tell us if this increase will cover the over 25% reduction on education for girls in Afghanistan, which has already taken place under his watch?
Yep. I can't give her the answer to exactly how the increment in the GPE funding, the Global Partnership for Education funding, will be dispensed around the world. But clearly, Afghanistan is a very important recipient country. It's where we can achieve a huge amount, where we already have achieved a huge amount, and we're committing a further 100 million. Madam Deputy Speaker, and we remain the third biggest bilateral donor. I think that those are facts of which people in this country should be very proud.
24 withdrawn. So Zara Sultana.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When Tony Blair shamefully led my party into the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, dutifully following Washington, he was fully backed by the Tories. But dissenting voices in this place and millions on the streets foresaw the disasters the wars would unleash. 20 years on, it's clear that these dissenting voices were right and that the British establishment was wrong. The wars took the lives of 50,000 Afghan civilians, more than 1 million Iraqis, and 636 British soldiers. They destabilised a whole region. They undermined democracy at home. They made us all unsafe. And now the Taliban are set to regain power in Afghanistan. So does the Prime Minister agree that these catastrophic wars, Afghanistan and Iraq, show the need for a new foreign policy, one that is based on restraint and diplomacy, not military aggression?
Prime Minister.
As I said earlier on, Madam Deputy Speaker, the circumstances in Afghanistan in 2001 demanded action. It was clear that the US had been under attack. Article 5 of the NATO treaty was invoked. I believe that it was right to take action against that brutal and ruthless terrorist cell which was incubated in Afghanistan. And actually, Madam Deputy Speaker, if you look at the Honourable Lady sticks up for democracy, or says she wants to advocate democracy. The Taliban had no democracy then, Madam Deputy Speaker, and nor did they educate girls in school. And if she refuses to see what the soldiers, the men and women of this country, the diplomats, the development officers have done in helping young girls and women in Afghanistan, and if she refuses to see their achievement, then I really think that she is blind to the facts.
David Johnston.
Madam Deputy Speaker, Didcot in my constituency is the proud home of the 11 EOD and Search Regiment, which played a vital role in our operations in Afghanistan, sadly losing members along the way. And I have other constituents who also lost loved ones during the conflict. So this is doubtless a difficult time for all of them. Will my right honourable friend join me in paying tribute to the bravery and sacrifice of my constituents and others in our operations in Afghanistan?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I do. And I pay tribute to their bravery, their sacrifice, and like my honourable friend, the member for Tunbridge, I've been to that cemetery in Kabul, as I'm sure many colleagues in this House have, and I've seen the memorials to British soldiers actually going back decades, if not more than 100 years, Madam Deputy Speaker. This country has been involved in trying to bring stability to Afghanistan. I thank the regiment based in his constituency for what they have done. And I simply want to repeat the burden of my point to the House today, which is I do not believe that their efforts and their sacrifice have been in vain.
Now, video link to Mohammed Yassin.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Hazara community in Afghanistan is an extremely vulnerable religious minority, millions of whom already live in constant fear and jeopardy as victims of targeted attacks. Only last month, a Hazara girls' school in Kabul was bombed. So what is his government doing to ensure the Hazaras are provided adequate protection now that international troops are leaving Afghanistan?
I understand the concerns that the honourable gentleman has, and he will understand the limits of what we can do by way of practical direct military action, but that has been the case, as he knows, for several years now. What we can try to do is ensure there is a settlement in Kabul that protects the rights of all minorities, including the religious minorities that he describes.
There goes video link to Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I join with the Prime Minister and others in paying tribute to our armed forces who've served in Afghanistan. My right honourable friend will be well aware that the primary source of income for the Afghan farmers is the poppy crop. And our allies in the United States took a view of torching the poppy crop because it supplies the illegal drugs trade. But rather than do that, would my right honourable friend consider that we should purchase the poppy crop and use it for beneficial pharmaceutical purposes rather than allowing it to continue to supply the illegal drugs trade?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his imaginative suggestion. It's one I actually considered many years ago and researched quite deeply. And unfortunately, I think the reality is that we would not achieve the result that he suggests. And all that would happen actually is that the farmers in the Taliban-controlled farmers in particular in Afghanistan would not only grow legal opium for medicinal use, but they would also grow illegal crops as well. So we would simply have a double market.
Video link to Jamie Stone.
Good afternoon, Madam Deputy Speaker. Greetings from the far north of Scotland. The Prime Minister has referred to diplomatic and political efforts. He's also referred to different tools. And also, to my delight, he's just referred to the BBC World Service. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that the BBC World Service is a national treasure and is actually one of the strongest arms of soft power this country can wield, and it should be enhanced and used to the maximum effect to give succour to our friends and to those in Afghanistan and all over the world. Thank you.
I agree. I associate myself completely with the views of the right honourable gentleman. The honourable gentleman, I can tell him that that's why we're providing through the FCDO this year almost 95 million more pounds to the BBC World Service.
Final question is to Mark Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I place on record the same thanks to the service and sacrifice of our armed forces who've served in Afghanistan. As my right honourable friend said in the statement, we owe the translators and locally employed staff in Afghanistan an enormous debt of gratitude for all the work that they have done in supporting the UK Armed Forces personnel. Does the Prime Minister agree that we repay these people and help them to begin new lives here in recognition of everything that they have done in support of our country?
My honourable friend is completely right, and I know that his views are echoed in every corner of this House. We owe those people a huge debt for their bravery, their sacrifice, the risks they've run, not just to their own lives, but to the lives of their families as well, Madam Deputy Speaker, and that's why the Afghan relocations and assistance policy addresses those risks, and I'm proud that already 1,500 have been allowed to come safely to this country, and I thank everybody involved for the speed and efficiency with which they've been handling those cases.
I thank the Prime Minister for his statement, and point of order, Marcia de Cordova.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The rules of this House are very clear that any honourable member visiting another member's constituency in any official capacity should inform that member. And indeed, the ministerial code is very clear that ministers making any official visits to someone's constituency should inform them in time and in advance. This morning, the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer has visited the new Covent Garden flower market in my Battersea constituency, and disappointingly, his office has not informed me. So I seek your guidance, Madam Deputy Speaker, as to how we can ensure that ministers follow the rules like the rest of us. And furthermore, I wrote to the Chancellor in May about the problems and the support for traders at the flower market, and I'm yet to receive a response despite several attempts at chasing his office. So I seek your advice on how we can ensure the Chancellor responds to me.
Well, I thank the honourable member for giving me notice of this point of order. I assume that she has told the Chancellor that she is raising this in the House. She's quite correct. The document called the Rules of Behaviour and Courtesies in the House of Commons deals with the issue that she's raised. When a member visits another member's constituency, except on a purely private visit, they should take reasonable steps in advance to tell the member in whose constituency the visit is taking place. That guidance also states that failing to do so is regarded by colleagues as very discourteous. She also refers to the ministerial code, and again she is correct in saying in para 10.10, ministers intending to make an official visit within the United Kingdom must inform in advance and in good time the MPs whose constituencies are to be included within the itinerary. The Honourable Lady has made clear her concern. I'm sure that the Treasury bench will have heard that and will feed back the points that she has raised. Thank you. I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes to make arrangements for the next business.